Martha Whitfield's weathered fingers trembled as she gripped the phone, her morning coffee forgotten and cooling on the kitchen counter. Through her ranch house window, she could see what no grandmother should ever witness: her beloved Thunder, all 2,000 pounds of gentle Brahman bull wrapped tight in the deadly coils of an 18-foot python. The sight wasn't real. It couldn't be real. But Thunder's desperate, shallow gasps cut through the Texas morning air like broken prayers, and Martha's knees buckled against the windowsill. The porcelain mug crashed to the floor, hot coffee splashing across her bare ankles, but she barely felt the burn. Her hands shook so violently she could barely dial 911. "My bull," she whispered into the receiver, her voice cracking like old leather. "That snake's killing my Thunder." She'd buried her husband Harold 3 years ago, watched her children move to distant cities, survived everything life could throw at an old ranch woman. "Ma'am, help is coming," the dispatcher promised. But Martha could see Thunder's massive chest rising slower, weaker with each strangled breath. How much time did they have? And would anyone reach them before it was too late? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Rolling Hills Ranch stretched across 5,000 acres of East Texas pasture land, where the morning sun painted golden streaks through ancient oak trees, and the air still carried the sweet scent of blue bonnets from spring. For 45 years, this had been Martha Whitfield's sanctuary, a place where she and Harold had built their dreams one fence post at a time. Now, at 72, with arthritis in her knees and loneliness in her heart, the ranch felt too big, too quiet, too full of memories that whispered in empty rooms. Martha had always been tougher than 10-penny nails, as Harold used to say. She'd taught 3rd grade for 20 years before they bought the ranch, handling unruly children with the same firm kindness she used on stubborn cattle. Her silver hair was always pulled back in a practical bun, her hands calloused from decades of ranch work, and her blue eyes still sharp enough to spot trouble from a mile away. But lately those eyes had been clouded with worry about things she couldn't control. Medical bills that kept coming, a mortgage payment she'd missed last month, and the growing certainty that she'd have to sell the only home she'd ever truly loved. Thunder had been her saving grace through it all. The massive Brahman bull, with his distinctive silver-gray coat and gentle brown eyes, wasn't just livestock to Martha, he was family. She'd bottle-fed him as a calf after his mother died during a difficult birth, staying up nights in the barn, coaxing him to drink, singing old hymns while he nuzzled against her shoulder. Harold used to joke that Thunder thought Martha was his mother, the way he'd follow her around the pasture like an oversized puppy. Even now, at 8 years old and weighing over 2,000 pounds, Thunder would still rest his massive head against Martha's chest when she scratched behind his ears, making a rumbling sound of contentment that vibrated through her bones. What Martha never told anyone, not even Harold before he passed, was that Thunder had saved her husband's life 6 years ago. Harold had been bush-hogging the back 40 when his tractor hit a hidden washout and rolled, pinning him underneath. Thunder had found him there, somehow understanding the gravity of the situation, and had stayed with Harold for 3 hours, using his massive body to shield the injured man from the blazing Texas sun. When Martha finally found them, Thunder had been gently licking Harold's face, keeping him conscious and calm until the paramedics arrived. That bull had more sense than most people Martha knew, and certainly more loyalty than her own children, who called twice a year and sent Christmas cards with generic signatures. Her son lived in Seattle now, busy with his tech company and his new wife, who thought Texas was too rural. Her daughter had moved to Boston for medical school and never left, too important with her cardiology practice to visit more than once every few years. They meant well, Martha supposed, but they didn't understand that some roots run too deep to transplant, and some bonds can't be measured in blood alone. The morning had started like any other at Rolling Hills Ranch. Martha woke at 5:30, same as she had for decades, her internal clock more reliable than any alarm. She'd shuffled to the kitchen in her worn slippers, started the coffee, and begun preparing Thunder's morning treat, a handful of sweet feed mixed with molasses, the way he'd loved it since he was a calf. By 6:15, she was walking across the dewy grass toward the stock pond where Thunder always waited for her, patient as sunrise. But Thunder wasn't there. For the first time in 8 years, the big bull was nowhere to be seen near the water's edge. Martha squinted across the pasture, her heart skipping a beat. Thunder was a creature of habit, more punctual than most people she knew. Every morning at 6:20 sharp, he'd be standing by the old mesquite tree, watching for her approach with those intelligent brown eyes that seemed to hold conversations she couldn't quite hear. "Thunder?" she called, her voice carrying across the still morning air. "Come on, boy. Breakfast time." Nothing, just the distant lowing of cattle in the far pasture and the whisper of wind through the grass. Martha's arthritis protested as she climbed over the wooden fence, but worry drove her forward. She followed the well-worn path toward the pond, calling Thunder's name every few steps. The sweet feed rattled in the metal bucket she carried, a sound that had never failed to bring him running. That's when she heard it, a sound that didn't belong in her peaceful morning routine, a low, guttural noise that seemed to come from the earth itself, somewhere between pain and desperation. It was thunder, but not the contented rumble she knew. This was the sound of suffering. Martha's blood ran cold as she crested the small hill overlooking the stock pond. There, in the shallow water near the cattails, was a scene that her 72-year-old mind struggled to process. Thunder lay on his side, his massive frame partially submerged, and wrapped around him like some nightmare made real was the largest snake Martha had ever seen. The python's diamond-patterned scales gleamed wet in the morning light, its muscular coils thick as fence posts, tightening with methodical precision around Thunder's body. "Sweet Jesus," Martha whispered, the bucket falling from her numb fingers to clatter against the stones. "No, not my boy." Thunder's head was still above water, his nostrils flaring as he fought for each breath. His eyes, wide with terror and confusion, found Martha's face across the distance. In that gaze, she saw everything: his trust in her, his fear, his desperate plea for help. This was the same bull who had once carried Harold to safety, who had protected their ranch from coyotes and wild dogs, who had never hurt a living soul in his 8 years of life. The python was enormous, easily 18 feet long and thick as Martha's waist at its center. "How did you explain something like this?" "There's a giant snake attacking my bull. At Rolling Hills Ranch on County Road 247, it's killing him." "Ma'am, did you say a snake?" "A python. 18 feet if it's an inch. It's got my bull wrapped up in the pond and he's dying. You need to send someone now." As Martha gave the dispatcher her location, she watched Thunder's struggles grow weaker. His breathing was becoming more labored, the intervals between each breath growing longer. The python showed no mercy, no emotion, just the cold efficiency of a predator that had found its prey. "Help is on the way, ma'am. Stay back from the animal and don't try to intervene." But as Martha ended the call, she knew that help might not arrive in time. Thunder's eyes were starting to glaze, and the python's coils were tightening with each passing minute. The Texas Rangers Wildlife Unit received Martha's emergency call at 6:52 a.m., just as the 3-person team was finishing their morning briefing at the district office. Jake Patterson, the unit's lead ranger, was reviewing reports of increased python sightings in East Texas when the radio crackled to life with the dispatcher's urgent voice. "Unit 7, we have a code red animal attack at Rolling Hills Ranch, County Road 247. Large constrictor attacking livestock. Elderly female caller sounds distressed." Jake's coffee cup froze halfway to his lips. Rolling Hills Ranch. The name hit him like a physical blow, dragging up memories he'd spent 26 years trying to bury. That was the ranch where his father had died, where 12-year-old Jake had watched paramedics load Tom Patterson's broken body into an ambulance after a tractor accident that still haunted his dreams. "Copy that, dispatch." "Unit 7 responding," Jake managed, his voice steadier than his hands as he reached for his gear. His teammates, Sarah Running Bear and Marcus Stone, were already moving, but Jake's mind was spinning backward through time to a day when the world had shifted on its axis and nothing had ever been the same. Sarah, their wildlife specialist, was checking her equipment with practiced efficiency. At 29, she was the youngest member of their team, but had earned respect through her expertise with dangerous animals and her cool head in crisis situations. Her Cherokee heritage had given her an intuitive understanding of animal behavior that textbooks couldn't teach, and her PhD in wildlife management had provided the scientific foundation to back up her instincts. "Burmese python, most likely," she said, slinging her gear bag over her shoulder. "We've had 3 confirmed sightings in this county over the past month. They're getting bolder, hunting larger prey." Marcus Stone, their veteran ranger, grunted his acknowledgement as he loaded tranquilizer equipment into their vehicle. At 45, with 20 years of service behind him, Marcus had seen everything the Texas wilderness could throw at them. His graying hair and weathered face spoke of decades spent in the field, and his reputation for staying calm under pressure had saved lives more than once. "Probably someone's pet that got too big to handle," Marcus said, his voice carrying the cynicism that came from too many encounters with human stupidity. "Rich folks buy exotic animals, then dump them when reality hits. We're the ones who clean up the mess." The drive to Rolling Hills Ranch took 18 minutes, with Jake pushing their vehicle harder than protocol recommended. As they turned onto County Road 247, memories flooded back unbidden. He remembered riding in the passenger seat of his father's patrol car down this same road, proud to be accompanying Ranger Tom Patterson on what had turned out to be his final call. The irony wasn't lost on Jake that he was now returning to the same ranch as the lead ranger himself, racing against time to save a life instead of losing one. "Radio check," Jake said as they approached the ranch gate. But static answered him instead of the clear acknowledgement he expected. He tried again, adjusting frequencies, but the interference seemed to be getting worse instead of better. "That's weird," Sarah commented, checking her own radio. "Mine's acting up too." Marcus frowned at his equipment. Solar flare activity was mentioned on the morning weather report. Sometimes plays hell with electronics. They could see Martha standing near the stock pond as they pulled up the gravel drive, her small figure dwarfed by the vast Texas landscape. Even from a distance, her distress was obvious in the way she paced back and forth, wringing her hands. Jake's heart clenched as he recognized something familiar in her posture. The same helpless desperation he'd seen in his own mother's eyes 26 years ago. The scene that greeted them at the pond was worse than Jake had imagined. Thunder lay partially submerged in the shallow water, his massive Brahman frame motionless except for the barely perceptible rise and fall of his chest. The python was enormous, its diamond-patterned coils wrapped around the bull with mechanical precision. Jake had seen photographs of large constrictors, but witnessing one in action was entirely different. This was nature at its most ruthlessly efficient and most terrifying. "Jesus Christ," Marcus breathed, his usual composure cracking. He hadn't expected to be recognized, hadn't prepared for the emotional complexity of this moment. "Yes, ma'am? Tom Patterson was my father." "Lord have mercy," Martha whispered, fresh tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "Your daddy died trying to save my Thunder when he was just a calf. That bull carried him half a mile to get help when his tractor rolled. Now look at him, dying while I stand here helpless." The revelation stunned Jake into silence. His father had never told him the details of his final call, and Jake had been too young and too traumatized to ask the right questions afterward. Now, 26 years later, he was learning that his father's death had been connected to this very bull, that Tom Patterson had given his life trying to save the same animal that was now fighting for breath in front of them. "We need to try calling for backup," Sarah said, attempting to raise dispatch on her radio. Nothing but static answered her efforts. "Jake, my radio's completely dead." Jake tried his own equipment with the same result. The interference had grown worse, leaving them effectively cut off from outside support. Marcus's radio produced nothing but electronic snow, and even their vehicle's more powerful communication system had fallen silent. "This is impossible," Marcus said, his frustration evident. 3 different radio systems on different frequencies don't just fail simultaneously. Thunder's breathing became more labored, each exhale weaker than the last. The python's coils tightened incrementally, a slow-motion execution that was becoming more horrifying with each passing second. Jake realized they were completely on their own. No backup, no specialized equipment, no veterinary support. Just 3 rangers, an elderly woman, and a dying bull, with time running out faster than sand through an hourglass. "We can't wait for backup," Jake said, his voice carrying the authority that came with command decisions. "That bull will be dead in minutes if we don't act now. I can't watch another life end at this ranch while I stand here following protocol." The admission hung in the air like a physical presence. Sarah and Marcus exchanged glances, recognizing the weight of what their leader had just revealed. This wasn't just about a bull caught by a python. This was about a 12-year-old boy who had watched his father die at this very ranch, who had grown up believing he could have done something, anything, to change the outcome. "Jake," Martha said softly, stepping toward him with the instinctive grace of someone who had spent decades comforting frightened children in her classroom. "Your daddy didn't die for nothing. He died trying to save a life, and that's the most honorable thing a man can do. Thunder lived because of your father's sacrifice. Don't let that sacrifice be wasted now." The words hit Jake like a physical blow, but they also carried a strange comfort. "We'll need to work on multiple points simultaneously." Marcus was studying the terrain around the pond, his veteran's eye noting every advantage and obstacle. "Ground's soft near the water, but we've got solid footing on the bank. If that snake decides to move toward deeper water, we lose any chance of success." Thunder chose that moment to lift his head again, water streaming from his nostrils as he fought for breath. The effort seemed to exhaust him, and his massive frame shuddered with the strain. The python responded by tightening its coils incrementally, a calculated adjustment that made Thunder's ribs creak audibly. "We're running out of time," Martha said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Look at his eyes. He's giving up." Jake made the decision that would define the rest of his career. "We go in now. Sarah, you take the head. I'll work on the coils around his chest. That's where the pressure is most critical." He could see the individual scales, each one perfect and alien, and feel the raw power contained in those coils. The smell of pond water mixed with something else, something wild and predatory that spoke to ancient fears buried deep in human DNA. "Easy, boy," Jake whispered to Thunder, placing a gentle hand on the bull's massive head. "We're here now. Just hold on." Thunder's eye rolled toward Jake, and in that gaze was recognition that went beyond the immediate moment. This bull remembered another Patterson, remembered being saved by Jake's father all those years ago. The connection between past and present seemed to give Thunder new strength, and his breathing steadied slightly. Marcus positioned himself at the python's tail, grabbing the thick end with both hands. "This thing weighs at least 200 pounds, he grunted. "Maybe more." Sarah had achieved her position near the python's head, her hook positioned to control the snake's movement. It was like trying to move a steel cable powered by a hydraulic press, seemingly impossible, but not quite. Marcus threw his full body weight into pulling the tail section, using the leverage of his position on solid ground to create tension in the python's body. The snake's response was immediate and terrifying, a writhing explosion of muscle and scale that turned the shallow pond into a maelstrom of splashing water and desperate movement. Thunder's eyes went wide as the python's grip shifted, pressure moving from his chest to his neck. For a horrifying moment, Jake thought they had made things worse, that their intervention would be the final push that killed the gentle bull. But then Thunder did something that caught everyone by surprise. He helped. With a massive effort that seemed to draw on reserves of strength nobody knew he possessed, Thunder rolled slightly to his right, giving the Rangers better access to the python's coils. It was a calculated move, an act of cooperation that spoke to the bull's intelligence and his trust in the humans trying to save him. "He's helping us!" Martha cried from the bank, her voice filled with wonder and hope. "That's my boy, always thinking, even now." The shift in position gave Jake the leverage he needed. Working his hands under the coil around Thunder's chest, he began to pull with every ounce of strength in his body. The python's muscle resisted, but Jake felt it give slightly, not much, but enough to allow Thunder to draw a deeper breath. Sarah was struggling with the python's head, which had grown increasingly agitated as its grip on its prey weakened. The snake's mouth gaped open, revealing curved fangs designed for gripping rather than injecting venom. While not venomous, a bite from a python this size could still cause serious injury, and Sarah was operating at the very edge of her reach with the control hook. "It's loosening," Marcus shouted over the chaos. "Keep pulling." The coordination required was exhausting. Each ranger had to maintain pressure while adapting to the python's movements, working together like pieces of a complex machine. Jake's arms burned with the effort of fighting the snake's incredible strength, but he could feel progress, gradual, incremental, but real. Thunder was breathing more easily now, each breath deeper and more regular than the last. Color was returning to his eyes, and Jake could see the spark of intelligence that Martha had described. This was no ordinary bull, but a creature with depth and personality, worthy of the sacrifice being made to save him. The python made one final, desperate attempt to tighten its grip, every coil contracting simultaneously in a coordinated effort to crush its prey. For a terrifying moment, Thunder's breathing stopped completely, and Jake thought they had lost him. Thunder stood in the shallow water, sides heaving but breathing steadily, his intelligent eyes moving from ranger to ranger in what could only be described as gratitude. Water streamed from his gray coat, and there were red marks where the python's coils had pressed against his hide, but he was alive. Martha waded into the pond without regard for her shoes or the cold water, her arms reaching up to embrace Thunder's massive neck. The bull lowered his head gently, allowing the elderly woman to press her face against his wet coat, both of them trembling with relief and exhaustion. "Thank you," she whispered, looking at each of the rangers in turn. "Thank you for giving me my boy back." Jake stood in the pond, water dripping from his clothes, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders that he had carried for 26 years. This ranch had taken his father's life, but today it had given him something back. The knowledge that some things were worth the risk, that protocol mattered less than heart, and that his father's sacrifice had meaning that extended far beyond that tragic day so long ago. "Let's get him checked out," Sarah said, her scientific training kicking in even as she wiped pond water from her face. "Constriction injuries can be internal. We need to make sure nothing's broken." Jake began a careful examination of Thunder's massive frame, running his hands along the bull's ribs where the python's coils had pressed deepest. Thunder stood patiently, occasionally turning his great head to watch Jake's movements with what seemed like understanding. The trust in those brown eyes was humbling. This animal knew they had saved his life, and his gratitude was as clear as spoken words. "Ribs feel solid," Jake reported, pressing gently along Thunder's side. "No obvious breaks or displacement. His breathing is strong and regular." He paused at a small heart-shaped scar on Thunder's shoulder, his finger tracing the familiar outline. A vehicle was approaching fast, and Jake's stomach dropped as he realized what this might mean. "Back up," Marcus said grimly. "Someone must have gotten through on the radio." Jake's moment of triumph evaporated as reality set in. They had violated direct protocol, acted without authorization, and risked not only their own lives but their careers. The approaching vehicle likely carried their supervisor, District Commander Robert Hayes, who was known for his rigid adherence to rules and regulations. Jake had just handed Hayes everything he needed to end Jake's career and possibly criminal charges for reckless endangerment. The vehicle that pulled up to the pond wasn't the official Ranger SUV Jake had expected, but a battered pickup truck with veterinary equipment visible in the bed. A woman in her 60s climbed out, moving with the purposeful stride of someone accustomed to emergency calls. She wore faded jeans, mud-stained boots, and carried herself with the no-nonsense bearing of a country veterinarian. "Dr. Elizabeth Hawthorne," she introduced herself, though her attention was already focused on Thunder. "Large animal vet from Tyler. Got a call about a bull in distress." Martha's face lit up with recognition and relief. "Lizzie, how in heaven's name did you know to come?" "Strangest thing," Dr. Hawthorne replied, opening her equipment bag. "I was having breakfast when I got this overwhelming feeling that something was wrong out here. Harold always said I was part psychic, and I've learned to trust those instincts. Tried calling but couldn't get through. Seems like all the phone lines in the county are acting up this morning." Jake felt a chill that had nothing to do with his wet clothes. "Doctor Hawthorne, how exactly did you know to come to Rolling Hills Ranch specifically?" Elizabeth paused in her examination of Thunder, her hands still gentle on the bull's neck. "Truth is, I've been having dreams about this place for weeks. Dreams about Harold, about Martha being in trouble. I know that sounds crazy, but in my line of work, you learn that animals communicate in ways we don't fully understand. Sometimes that communication extends beyond the animals themselves." Sarah and Marcus exchanged glances, both clearly unsettled by the veterinarian's words. Jake felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up, but he pushed aside the uncomfortable questions her statement raised. Right now, Thunder needed medical attention, and the how and why of Dr. Hawthorne's arrival mattered less than her presence. "Can you tell us about those communication problems?" Sarah asked, her scientific curiosity overriding her discomfort. "All our radios went dead at exactly the same time. We've never seen anything like it. Solar flare activity peaked around dawn," Dr. Hawthorne explained while checking Thunder's pulse. "Creates all kinds of electromagnetic interference. But there's something else. Animals have been acting strange all week. Horses spooked, cattle restless, dogs howling at nothing. Sometimes I think they know things we don't." Thunder stood perfectly still during the examination, occasionally rumbling with contentment when Dr. Hawthorne found a particularly sensitive spot. His trust in the humans surrounding him was absolute, and Jake found himself moved by the bull's gentle nature. This wasn't just livestock. This was a creature with personality, intelligence, and emotional depth. "Physically, he's in remarkable condition considering what he's been through," Dr. Hawthorne announced after a thorough examination. "Some soft tissue damage from the constriction, bruising that will take a few days to heal, but no broken bones or internal injuries. This bull has the constitution of a locomotive." "He's always been tough," Martha said proudly, scratching behind Thunder's ears. "Remember when he was just a yearling and that pack of feral dogs got into the pasture? Thunder stood his ground, protected the whole herd, got torn up pretty bad, but he never backed down. Dr. Hawthorne was packing her equipment when she paused, looking directly at Jake with an expression of recognition. "You're Tom Patterson's boy, aren't you?" "Yes, ma'am." "Your father was a good man. He and Harold were close friends, used to hunt together every fall. Tom died trying to save a young bull from a tractor accident, didn't he?" Jake nodded, not trusting his voice to remain steady. "This bull," Dr. Hawthorne said, gesturing toward Thunder, "this is the same one, isn't it? The one your father died saving?" The question hung in the air like a physical presence. Jake had suspected the connection, but hearing it stated so plainly brought the full circle of events into sharp focus. His father had died saving Thunder's life 26 years ago, and now Jake had risked his career to save Thunder again. The symmetry was almost too perfect to be coincidence. "Harold told me the whole story before he passed," Dr. Hawthorne continued. "How Tom Patterson crawled under that rolled tractor to free a trapped calf, even though he knew the hydraulics were failing. How he stayed there holding up 2 tons of machinery with his own body until help arrived, but died from his injuries 3 days later. That calf grew up to be this bull." Thunder seemed to understand that he was the subject of conversation. He turned his massive head toward Jake, those intelligent brown eyes holding depths of memory and recognition. In that gaze, Jake saw not just gratitude for the recent rescue, but something deeper, a connection that transcended the immediate moment. "Thunder remembers," Martha said softly. "Animals don't forget kindness, especially not kindness that cost someone their life. Your daddy gave everything to save him, and Thunder's never forgotten that debt." The radio on Jake's belt suddenly crackled to life, making everyone jump. The static cleared and District Commander Hayes' voice came through loud and clear. "Unit 7, report your status. We've been trying to reach you for over an hour." Jake keyed his radio with hands that were steadier than he had any right to expect. "Unit 7 to command. Emergency situation resolved. Python successfully removed from livestock. No human injuries reported." "Copy that, Unit 7. Stand by for further instructions. We're en route to your location." The brief exchange brought reality crashing back. In less than an hour, Jake would have to face his supervisor and explain why he had violated protocol, why he had risked 3 careers to save a bull, and why he had made decisions that could have resulted in human casualties. The euphoria of success was rapidly being replaced by the cold certainty that consequences were coming. But as Jake looked at Thunder, standing strong and breathing freely in the morning sunlight, he found he didn't regret his choices. Some things were worth the risk. Some lives were worth saving regardless of the cost. His father had understood that truth 26 years ago, and today Jake had learned it for himself. Thunder walked slowly toward Jake, his massive hooves squelching in the muddy bank. When he reached the ranger, the great bull gently lowered his head until his forehead touched Jake's chest. The gesture was unmistakably one of gratitude and recognition, an acknowledgement that debts had been paid and honor had been served. The moment of triumph shattered like glass hitting concrete when Thunder suddenly staggered, his massive legs buckling beneath him. The great bull crashed to his knees in the shallow water, a sound like thunder itself, rolling across the quiet morning. His breathing, which had been strong and steady just moments before, became rapid and shallow, each exhale accompanied by a pink foam that spoke of internal injury. "No, no, no," Martha cried, rushing back into the pond without regard for her safety. "Thunder, stay with me, boy. You're going to be fine." But Thunder wasn't fine. Dr. Hawthorne was immediately at his side, her practiced hands moving over his massive frame with urgent efficiency. What she found made her face go pale beneath her weathered tan. "Internal bleeding," she announced grimly. "The python's constriction must have caused more damage than we initially thought." possibly a punctured lung, maybe internal organ damage. We need to get him to my clinic immediately. Jake felt the world tilt on its axis. They had fought so hard, risked everything to save Thunder's life, only to watch him dying slowly from injuries they couldn't see. The cruel irony wasn't lost on him. His father had died trying to save this bull, and now Jake might be watching that sacrifice become meaningless as Thunder slipped away despite their efforts. "How long does he have?" Sarah asked, her scientific training warring with the emotion in her voice. "Without immediate surgery? Maybe an hour, possibly less?" Dr. Hawthorne's words fell like hammer blows. "But moving him could kill him just as quickly. He weighs over 2,000 pounds, and any stress on his cardiovascular system right now could cause complete collapse." Thunder's great head drooped toward the water, his eyes losing the bright intelligence that had made him so special. Martha knelt beside him, her small hands stroking his massive neck, whispering words of comfort that seemed to reach him even through his distress. The bull's breathing was becoming more labored with each passing minute, and Jake could see death approaching with the same relentless inevitability as the python's coils. "There has to be something we can do," Marcus said, his gruff voice cracking with unexpected emotion. 20 years of ranger work had hardened him to loss, but watching this gentle giant fade away after their heroic rescue was breaking something inside his chest. Dr. Hawthorne was checking her equipment, her movements sharp with frustration. "I have surgical tools, but not the facilities for an operation this complex. Even if I could stop the internal bleeding, he needs blood transfusions, oxygen support, monitoring equipment I just don't have in my truck." The sound of approaching vehicles grew louder, and Jake looked up to see not one but 3 official SUVs racing down the ranch road, their emergency lights flashing. District Commander Robert Hayes was arriving with backup, probably expecting to find a routine animal control situation. Instead, he would find his lead ranger facing career-ending charges and a dying bull that represented everything wrong with breaking protocol. Thunder made a sound that Jake had never heard before, a low, mournful lowing that seemed to carry the weight of farewell. The bull's eyes found Martha's face, and in that gaze was acceptance and love, the same unconditional devotion he had shown her for 8 years. He was saying goodbye. "I can't," Martha whispered, her voice breaking completely. "I can't lose him too, Lord." "Haven't I lost enough?" The desperation in her voice cut through Jake like a blade. This woman had already buried her husband, watched her children move away, faced the reality of losing her ranch to financial hardship. Thunder wasn't just a bull to her, he was family, companion, and the last connection to the life she had built with Harold. Losing him would be like losing Harold all over again. "Ma'am," Dr. Hawthorne said gently, kneeling beside Martha in the muddy water, "sometimes the kindest thing we can do for an animal we love is to let them go peacefully. I have something in my bag that would make it easy for him. No pain, no struggle." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Jake felt his chest constrict with a pain that had nothing to do with physical injury. After everything they had been through, after breaking every rule to save Thunder's life, they were being asked to end it themselves. The irony was crushing. They had succeeded in their rescue only to be faced with an even more heartbreaking decision. "No," Martha said firmly, her voice gaining strength from somewhere deep inside. "No, I won't give up on him. Harold always said Thunder was too stubborn to die easy, and I'm too stubborn to let him." Thunder's breathing hitched, and for a terrifying moment Jake thought they had lost him. But the bull's chest continued to rise and fall, each breath a small victory against the gathering darkness. His eyes remained fixed on Martha's face, drawing strength from her presence even as his body failed him. The official vehicles pulled up to the pond in a cloud of dust and gravel. District Commander Hayes stepped out of the lead SUV, His face already set in the stern expression Jake knew meant serious trouble. Behind him came two other supervisors and what looked like a full investigation team. Enough firepower to end not just Jake's career but potentially to bring criminal charges for reckless endangerment. "Patterson!" Hayes barked across the distance. "What the hell is going on here? We've been trying to reach you for over an hour, and now I find you conducting unauthorized animal rescue operations?" Jake looked down at Thunder, whose labored breathing was growing weaker by the minute, then at Martha, whose faith in him was absolute, despite the circumstances. He thought about his father, who had made the ultimate sacrifice at this same ranch 26 years ago, and about the choices that defined a person's character when everything was on the line. "Sir?" Jake called back, his voice carrying across the water with surprising steadiness. "We have a medical emergency here." The animal rescue was successful, but we're dealing with complications. Hayes was already striding toward the pond, his expression growing darker with each step. "You were ordered to wait for backup, Ranger Patterson. You violated direct orders and put your team at risk for what? A bull?" The dismissive tone in Hayes's voice when he said, "a bull," made Jake's temper flare. This wasn't just any animal. This was Thunder, who had carried Jake's dying father to safety, who had been Martha's faithful companion through years of loneliness, who had shown more courage and loyalty than many humans Jake had known. "Yes, sir," Jake replied, meeting his commander's angry gaze without flinching. "For this bull. And I'd do it again." The words sealed his fate, and Jake knew it. He had just confessed to willful insubordination in front of witnesses, guaranteed himself a disciplinary hearing that would end his career. But looking at Thunder's trusting eyes and Martha's grateful face, he found he didn't care about the consequences. Thunder's breathing suddenly became more erratic, his massive frame shuddering with the effort of staying alive. Pink foam flecked his muzzle, and his eyes began to lose focus. Time was running out faster than anyone had anticipated, and Jake realized with growing horror that they were about to watch Thunder die while his supervisor lectured him about protocol violations. "He's fading fast," Dr. Hawthorne announced, her voice tight with professional concern. "If we're going to do anything, it has to be now." Martha pressed her face against Thunder's neck, her tears mixing with the pond water that still dripped from his coat. "Fight, baby," she whispered. "Just a little longer. Please don't leave me." Thunder's eye rolled toward her voice, and Jake saw something that made his breath catch. The bull was still fighting, still trying to stay alive for the woman who loved him. Even with death approaching, Thunder's loyalty was absolute. He wouldn't give up as long as Martha needed him. Jake made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life, regardless of how it turned out. He looked at his commander, at his career, at everything he had worked for over the past 14 years, and chose love over protocol one final time. "Dr. Hawthorne," he said quietly, "do whatever you have to do. I'll take full responsibility for the consequences." Hayes opened his mouth to object, but Jake cut him off with a look that brooked no argument. "This bull saved my father's life 26 years ago, Commander. Today, I'm returning the favor." Dr. Hawthorne moved with the swift precision of someone who had spent decades making life-or-death decisions in impossible circumstances. Her hands flew over her veterinary equipment, assembling what looked like a makeshift surgical kit while Thunder's breathing grew increasingly shallow. The pink foam at his muzzle was getting worse, confirming her worst fears about internal bleeding. "I need someone to hold his head steady," she commanded, her voice cutting through the tension like a scalpel. "Martha, keep talking to him. Your voice is the only thing keeping him conscious right now." Jake positioned himself at Thunder's massive head, feeling the bull's warm breath against his hands. Up close, he could see the individual whiskers on Thunder's muzzle, the long eyelashes that framed those intelligent brown eyes. the small scars that told the story of 8 years protecting Martha's ranch. This wasn't just an animal. This was an individual with history, personality, and a soul that somehow recognized Jake as Tom Patterson's son. District Commander Hayes stood at the edge of the pond, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. "Ranger Patterson, I am ordering you to step away from that animal immediately. You are in direct violation of—" "With respect, sir," Jake interrupted, never taking his eyes off Thunder. "You can court-martial me later. Right now, this bull needs help." Dr. Hawthorne had located what she believed to be the source of the internal bleeding, a spot on Thunder's left side where the python's coils had pressed deepest. Her fingers probed gently but firmly, and Thunder's body shuddered in response to her touch. "It's worse than I thought," she muttered, more to herself than to the others. "The python's constriction has caused what we call compartment syndrome. Essentially, the pressure has damaged muscle tissue and blood vessels throughout his torso. Without immediate intervention, his organs are going to start shutting down." Martha's weathered hand stroked Thunder's neck with infinite tenderness. "Remember when you were just a baby?" she whispered to the struggling bull. "You used to follow me around the pasture like a big puppy. Harold always said you thought I was your mama." Thunder's ear twitched at the sound of her voice, and his breathing seemed to steady slightly. Even in his critical condition, the bond between the elderly woman and the bull was undeniable. It was a connection that transcended species, built on years of mutual care and devotion. Sarah knelt beside Dr. Hawthorne, her wildlife expertise suddenly invaluable. "What can we do to help? We have emergency medical supplies in our vehicle." "I need you to run to my truck and get the large oxygen tank from the back," Dr. Hawthorne replied, without looking up. "And bring the portable defibrillator. If his heart stops, we'll have maybe 3 minutes to get it started again." As Sarah sprinted toward the veterinarian's truck, Marcus took up position at Thunder's rear, monitoring the bull's vital signs as best he could. Despite his gruff exterior, the veteran ranger's face was etched with concern. 20 years of wildlife work had taught him to read animals, and everything he was seeing told him that Thunder was losing the fight. Dr. Hawthorne made a decision that would either save Thunder's life or end it quickly. "I'm going to attempt emergency surgery right here," she announced. "It's not ideal, but it's his only chance. The alternative is watching him suffer for the next hour until his organs fail completely." "Do it," Martha said immediately. "Whatever it takes." Hayes stepped closer to the pond, his voice rising with indignation. "This is insanity. You're performing unauthorized surgery on livestock using unsterilized equipment in a pond. The liability alone—" "Commander," Jake said quietly, his voice carrying a note of finality that made Hayes pause. "My father died at this ranch 26 years ago trying to save this bull's life. Tom Patterson gave everything he had because he believed some things are worth the risk. Today, I'm making the same choice he did." The words seemed to echo across the water, carrying weight that went beyond their literal meaning. Hayes opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again, perhaps recognizing that he was witnessing something larger than a simple protocol violation. Dr. Hawthorne had located a surgical kit in her equipment bag and was preparing to make an incision when Thunder suddenly lifted his head. His eyes, which had been glazing with approaching death, suddenly focused with startling clarity. He looked directly at Jake, then at Martha, then at the other humans gathered around him. "He knows," Martha whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "He knows we're trying to help him." Thunder's great head settled back down, but his eyes remained alert and trusting. It was as if the bull had made a conscious decision to cooperate with his own rescue, to fight alongside the humans who were risking everything to save him. The surgery that followed was unlike anything Jake had ever witnessed. Dr. Hawthorne worked with steady hands despite the primitive conditions, making careful incisions while Sarah provided oxygen support and Marcus monitored Thunder's pulse, The bull remained remarkably still throughout the procedure, as if understanding that movement could mean death. "There," Dr. Hawthorne said after what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes. "I've located the primary source of bleeding and managed to repair the damaged blood vessel. But he's lost a lot of blood, and I don't have the equipment for a transfusion." Thunder's breathing was still labored, but the pink foam had stopped appearing at his muzzle. And his color was better, and his eyes remained focused and aware. The immediate crisis had passed, but he wasn't out of danger yet. It was then that something extraordinary happened, something that would be talked about in ranching communities across East Texas for years to come. A low, rumbling sound began to rise from the pasture behind them, growing louder and more insistent with each passing second. Jake turned to see Thunder's herd approaching the pond, not just a few curious cattle, but the entire group of 50-plus animals that called Rolling Hills Ranch home. They moved with purpose, led by an old Brahman cow that Jake recognized from his childhood visits to the ranch. She was Thunder's adoptive mother, the animal that had helped raise him after his birth mother died. "What are they doing?" Sarah asked, her voice filled with wonder. Martha was staring at the approaching herd with tears in her eyes. "They're coming to say goodbye," she whispered. "Animals know when one of their own is dying. They've come to be with Thunder." But as the herd drew closer, it became clear that this wasn't a death vigil. The cattle formed a loose circle around the pond, their collective presence creating a sense of protection and strength that seemed to energize Thunder. The old cow approached the water's edge and let out a long, mournful call that Thunder answered with a weak but determined response. Dr. Hawthorne was staring at the scene with professional amazement. "In 30 years of veterinary practice, I've never seen anything like this. It's as if they're lending him their strength." Thunder began to struggle to his feet, his massive frame shaking with the effort. Jake and Marcus immediately moved to support him, their combined strength helping the bull achieve a standing position. Thunder swayed dangerously for a moment, then steadied himself, his head held high despite his obvious weakness. The transformation was remarkable. Surrounded by his herd, supported by the humans who had risked everything to save him, Thunder seemed to draw strength from some deep reservoir of will. His breathing became stronger and more regular, and the alert intelligence returned to his eyes. Hayes watched the entire scene with growing amazement, his official anger gradually giving way to something approaching awe. "In 25 years of law enforcement," he said quietly, "I've never seen anything like this." Dr. Hawthorne began packing her equipment, her movements quick and efficient. "He's not out of the woods yet," she warned. "He'll need careful monitoring for the next 48 hours, antibiotics to prevent infection and complete rest, but his vital signs are stabilizing." Thunder took a tentative step toward the bank, then another. With Jake and Marcus supporting him on either side, he managed to walk out of the pond and onto solid ground. The herd pressed closer, their presence a living wall of support and protection. And Martha followed Thunder onto the bank, her small hand finding its familiar place on his massive neck. "That's my boy," she whispered, "always fighting, always finding a way." As Thunder stood among his herd, his breathing steady and his eyes bright with renewed life, Jake felt a profound sense of completion. The circle that had begun with his father's death 26 years ago was finally closed. Tom Patterson's sacrifice had meaning. Thunder's life had been saved twice by the Patterson family, and Jake had learned that some things truly were worth any risk. Hayes approached Jake with an expression that was impossible to read. "Ranger Patterson, we need to have a serious discussion about what happened here today." Jake nodded, accepting whatever consequences awaited him. "Yes, sir. I understand." But before Hayes could continue, Martha stepped between them, her small frame somehow commanding despite being dwarfed by the two men. 6 weeks later, the morning sun painted Rolling Hills Ranch in shades of gold and amber as Jake Patterson drove down the familiar gravel road for what had become a weekly ritual. Thunder stood in his usual spot by the stock pond, his massive frame silhouetted against the Texas sky, looking every bit as majestic as he had before his encounter with the python. The surgical scar on his side had healed into a thin line that would serve as permanent reminder of the day when protocol gave way to heart. Martha emerged from the ranch house as Jake parked his truck, her weathered face breaking into the smile that had become as familiar to him as his own reflection. At 72, she moved with renewed energy, the weight of despair that had burdened her shoulders for years finally lifted. The ranch mortgage had been caught up through a community fundraising effort that had surprised everyone with its generosity, and her cancer treatment had been successful beyond her doctor's most optimistic projections. "Morning, Jake," she called, carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee across the yard. "Thunder's been watching the road for the past hour. I swear that bull has a better sense of time than most people." Jake accepted the coffee gratefully, inhaling the rich aroma that always reminded him of childhood mornings in his mother's kitchen. "How's he been feeling? Any lingering effects from the surgery?" "Dr. Hawthorne says he's made a complete recovery. Better than complete, actually. She thinks all the attention and care has improved his overall health." "He's been acting like a calf again, playful and curious about everything." Thunder had indeed spotted Jake's arrival and was making his way toward them with the dignified gait of a bull who knew he was the center of attention. His gray coat gleamed in the morning light, and his eyes held the same gentle intelligence that had first captured Jake's heart all those years ago when he was a grieving 12-year-old boy. The disciplinary hearing that Jake had expected never materialized. District Commander Hayes had submitted a report that described the rescue operation as unconventional but necessary given the emergency circumstances and communication failures. Jake had been officially commended for his quick thinking and leadership under pressure, though Hayes had made it clear in private that future deviations from protocol would not be overlooked so easily. Sarah Running Bear had been promoted to senior wildlife specialist based on her expert handling of the python situation, and her detailed report on invasive species management had been distributed throughout the state ranger system. Marcus Stone had postponed his retirement, claiming that the Thunder rescue had reminded him why he'd become a ranger in the first place. The python itself had been successfully relocated to a wildlife research facility in Houston, where scientists were studying its behavior patterns to better understand how to prevent future incidents. Dr. Hawthorne had testified that the snake showed no signs of aggression toward humans and had simply been following its natural hunting instincts when it targeted Thunder. "I have something to show you," Martha said, leading Jake toward the barn. "Been working on this for weeks, wanted it to be perfect." Inside the barn, mounted on the wall where everyone could see it, was a beautiful wooden plaque. The craftsmanship was exquisite, clearly the work of someone who understood both woodworking and love. Carved into the rich walnut were the words, "In memory of Ranger Tom Patterson, who gave his life saving others. In honor of Ranger Jake Patterson, who carries on that tradition, and in celebration of Thunder, who reminds us that some bonds transcend species." Jake felt his throat constrict with emotion as he read the inscription. Below the words was a carved image of a bull, a man in a ranger's hat, and a heart-shaped symbol that represented the scar Thunder still carried on his shoulder. "Martha, this is beautiful." "You didn't have to. I wanted to," she interrupted gently. "Your father deserves to be remembered for the hero he was, and you deserve recognition for the man you've become. And Thunder, well, Thunder deserves to have his story told." They walked back outside to find Thunder waiting patiently by the fence, his massive head turned in their direction. When he saw Jake approaching, the bull let out a low rumble of greeting that seemed to carry pure contentment. Jake reached through the fence to scratch behind Thunder's ears, marveling at how such a powerful animal could be so gentle. "I've been thinking about something," Martha said, leaning against the fence post. "About legacy, about what we leave behind when we're gone. Harold and I never had children, but we had this ranch, and we had Thunder. Now Thunder has you, and you have a story that connects 3 generations of caring." A pickup truck approached the ranch house, and Jake recognized Dr. Hawthorne's vehicle. She'd been making regular visits to check on Thunder's progress, though Jake suspected her growing friendship with Martha was as much a motivation as professional duty. "Elizabeth's been a godsend," Martha continued. "Turns out she's Harold's younger sister, something I never knew all these years. She's been helping me understand that family doesn't always come from blood relations. Sometimes it comes from shared experiences, from choosing to care about each other." Dr. Hawthorne joined them at the fence, her medical bag in hand, though her visits had become more social than professional in recent weeks. "How's our patient today?" she asked, though Thunder's robust appearance made the question rhetorical. "Ornery as ever," Martha replied with affection. "This morning I caught him trying to court the neighbor's prize heifer through the fence. I think he's feeling his oats again." The 3 humans stood in comfortable silence, watching Thunder graze peacefully in the morning sunlight. The bull's presence seemed to radiate contentment, and Jake found himself thinking about the strange journey that had brought them all together, a journey that began with tragedy 26 years ago and had somehow transformed into something beautiful. "I need to tell you both something," Jake said, his voice carrying a note of important news. "I've been offered a promotion to regional supervisor. It would mean moving to Austin, taking on administrative responsibilities." Martha's face showed concern. "That sounds like a wonderful opportunity, but you don't look happy about it." "I turned it down," Jake admitted. "Told them I wanted to stay in the field, working directly with wildlife and communities like this one. Some things matter more than career advancement." Thunder chose that moment to walk over to them, pressing his massive head against Jake's chest in the gesture that had become their personal greeting. The trust and affection in that simple contact spoke volumes about the bonds that had been forged through crisis and strengthened through time. "Your father would be proud," Martha said simply. "Not just of the choice you made, but of the man you've become." He always believed that the best rangers were those who understood that their job was about more than enforcing regulations. It was about protecting the things that make life worth living. As Jake prepared to leave, making his customary promise to return the following week, Thunder followed him to the fence line. The bull watched Jake's departure with the same patient attention he gave to everything else in his well-ordered world, secure in the knowledge that some connections transcend time and circumstance. Driving away from Rolling Hills Ranch, Jake reflected on how a single morning had changed everything, not just for Thunder, but for all of them. They had discovered that courage comes in many forms, that family can be chosen as well as inherited, and that sometimes the most important victories are the ones that never make the headlines. In his rear-view mirror, he could see Thunder still standing by the fence, a living symbol of resilience, loyalty, and the enduring power of love to overcome any obstacle. Sometimes life gives us second chances wrapped in the most unexpected packages. Jake Patterson learned this truth when he returned to the ranch where his father died, not as a grieving child, but as a man capable of honoring that sacrifice. Thunder, the gentle giant who had been saved by one Patterson and rescued by another, became living proof that love transcends generations and species. At 72, Martha discovered that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about the souls who choose to stay, who show up when it matters most, who remind us that we're never truly alone. The morning thunder nearly died became the day they all truly came alive, finding purpose in protecting what they cherished most. For every senior who has wondered if their best days are behind them, Thunder's story whispers a different truth. Our greatest adventures often begin when we choose love over fear, connection over isolation, and hope over despair. The bonds we forge through shared trials become the legacy we leave behind, not in grand gestures but in simple acts of showing up, speaking up, and never giving up on what matters most. What unexpected thunder in your life has reminded you that it's never too late for new beginnings? Have you ever found family in the most surprising places? Share your story in the comments below. We'd love to hear how you've discovered that the best chapters can be written at any age.